Good afternoon, everyone. I'll call the FinCom meeting to order. Thank you for all being here. And the usual, it is being recorded and televised. Just a reminder. May I have an approval of the agenda? May I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Excellent. I will now open the floor to public comment. And I will close the floor to public comment. I'm getting very good at that. Okay, minutes from January 13th. From January 13th, Terry, you had sent them out before. You had sent them out to us the meeting before.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I thought the agenda said the 18th.
It does say the 18th, but we didn't approve the 13th yet.
Okay.
So we don't have the 18th yet, I agree.
Okay.
And we,
Did we do the 9th too? Did we? I think I may have not. This was Saturday, right?
we didn't approve any meetings this Saturday at the budget review. This was from the meeting before. So we had the 13th and then we didn't approve them because Terry wasn't with us. Or we didn't vote on them. So we can do it now or we can postpone it.
I'm good.
Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay. And then we will wait till we get the 18th, Terry, to approve them. Thank you.
16th and 18th.
Funny how that works. Okay. Operating budget reviews. Noah, I believe you're up. Please. Yes, please. You'll have to be at a microphone. Thank you, Noah.
Noah Carberg, Assistant Manager, Nantucket Memorial Airport. Tom Rafter sends his regards. He loves being here, but he also loves boating around Florida this time of year, too. So, starting off, I'll be using the presentation that we provided to the FinCom. We're reevaluating our mission, goal, and value statement with the mission that the mission of the Nantucket Memorial Airport is to provide operationally safe, economically sustainable, and environmentally responsible air service to the residents, businesses, and visitors to the island of Nantucket. We'll be working on that and going through the vision statement process again with our stakeholder group. We have the following major goals for fiscal year 21. It's been on this sheet for 3 years, but we will continue to address infrastructure improvements. This coming fall, August, September, we hope to kick off with a large discretionary grant, the upgrade to Taxiway Echo, which is our 6,300 feet main parallel taxiway to the runway. It's approaching 40 years old, which is really, really, really old in pavement lifetime. It's no longer workable for the size of the aircraft that we have. It's not just to accommodate larger aircraft. If we want to get any kind of aircraft from the runway to the apron over the next few years, it's a critical project for us to undertake. We have staff on site from contracting firm who will be working on upgrading our access control, closed circuit television, and our IT and badging identification system. As I'm sure you understand, the largest growth market that we've seen at the airport has been in the post-TSA screening realm. 10 years for that system is obsolete and it's out of capacity as we've increased in the area that we need to control through badging, closed circuit TV. It's put an added stress onto the system, so we're fully modernizing that system. This is stage one of a 2-stage project. We should be ready for the summer. For our peak season, we'll come back next fall and finish up with the closed circuit TV end of that. We're halfway through our environmental assessment and our environmental impact review. Today, we did just receive our MEPA certificate, so we are moving on through that process. One of the goals is not only getting feedback from the environmental stakeholders on the items that they think you should be doing a better job of, but we've received a lot of really helpful feedback that they're proud of what the airport has done, especially in regards to our rare species items, which is good to see. It's been a sort of pet project of mine since I came along. We continue to develop air service. Philadelphia on American Saturdays is new this year, as is extra service on JetBlue. We continue expansion of non-aeronautical revenue generation. This is an important hedge against the volatility in air traffic and passenger-dependent income.
And what would be an example of that, please, Noah?
Land rents, for example. Land rents, business fees, the bunker area development, concession development.
Thank you.
And we continue to refine our rates and charges documents to ensure sufficient cost recovery. There were many years at the airport where Tom and I like to call it the old Johnny Carson envelope routine. You know, how much should a landing fee for a 402 be? And what you'll probably hear Tom and I say before, it's not so much benchmarking as a matter of comparison. You know, what's the difference between the Vineyard and Hyannis and Plymouth and Nantucket? It's not about that dollars and cents for a fee. It's, well, what's the cost of providing that? Obviously, a gallon of milk on Nantucket costs more than a gallon of milk in Hyannis. So rates and charges really looks at the cost all the way from the raw material that goes into a project, the healthcare associated with that staff's salary. And that's really important to capture in rates and charges. Our major initiatives and accomplishments, we reconstructed our interim hold room expansion. As you know, our TSA post-secure traffic has been growing. We put in a tent 1 year, it worked for a year. The next year we found out it would be greatly under capacity. We doubled the size, brought more amenities to it. For the first year, we don't have to go through hoops. It's funny, it's almost like it's a hoop structure, but it's not. We have the expertise on staff, the materials in-house. We're anticipating a much easier route to be ready for the summer. I mentioned the increased air service. JetBlue is added their frequency. They were running 10 flights on peak days. They'll now be doing 11 on Fridays and Sundays. American added service. Delta added a Saturday and Sunday flight. The key point that I really like is that this summer our slow day is going to be busier than 2017's peak day.
Oh.
And we did some work on where this benefit accrues. I think there's some thought in the community that air service, the benefit really only accrues to the airport. It's more of a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 for the Philadelphia service, for example. The fee input to the airport is about $20,000 if you prorate fuel sales, passenger facility charge, spending. The increase to the town through the meals and restaurant taxes, the meal and lodging taxes is twice that. It's about $40,000. The increase in retail spend is on the order of $120,000. The increase to the state tax pool is about $50,000. So the airport is actually the smallest beneficiary of these service increases. They really pile on to the local business community. Our priorities were an airport. That first bullet is never going to be anything other than safety and security. We want to deliver convenience to the traveling public, but it's never going to be at the sacrifice of safety and security. We're looking to increase the quality of our service delivery in our concessions in what we call the total passenger experience. If you look at a graph of how a passenger arrives to an airport until the point that they leave, they're handled by 5 to 6 different firms by the time they're dropped at the curb, check in, go through TSA, buy a snack, get on the plane. But the airport's role is to try to tie all of those groups together and make sure that the continuum of services provided is at least adequate. Financial and sustainability. We've had some good years. We hope to keep that up even if there is a fallback in GDP and passenger spend. And we are trying to improve air service. We're airport people. We're not messaging and marketing people. We are out there. We've been very fortunate in summer air service, but we are pounding the pavement and trying to beef up what we can for the year-round service, the 9-seat service that we're all used to. The significant changes year to year. increase in seasonal traffic, we're becoming a highly seasonal airport more than ever before. We continue to see a large impact of the larger aircraft on our infrastructure, especially the JetBlue E190 weighing over 100,000 pounds. JetBlue is taking delivery of the Airbus 220, which will be 144,000 pounds. So in quick order, as we're going through our infrastructure projects, they're all designed to that as the critical aircraft. That breakpoint is significant in FAA pavement design. It's about extra 4 to 5 inches of hot mix asphalt and a stabilized subbase, which could be an extra 20 to 45% on an infrastructure project. And then, of course, with the loss of service to Rectrix, the local air service market has become more and more of a challenge. Our key issues, I've mentioned infrastructure 3 times. Infrastructure, not only for Nantucket, but for many other airports in the country. There was a lot of investment in the 80s. These pavements nationwide are becoming old, and the system has a lot less money available through the Airway Trust Fund. And the AIP program makes less and less of this available on a purchasing power standpoint. Air freight services, we have the Allies Air hangar it's actually a sublease, but that lease will be coming up soon, and we're taking steps to make sure that that lease will be available to help with the air freight market locally. We see continued ferry competition, and we see regulatory challenges. And as I mentioned, funding for the national system. We've probably heard that the airlines have, for the 5th or 6th fiscal quarter, posted $1 billion in bag fees. These bag fees are not taxed like normal ticket taxes are. It's one of the main reasons for the shortfall in the national funding system. Tom and I continue to work through our trade group to address these points.
Now, on the air freight services, how do you measure that? By tonnage that goes through? And what is typically Nantucket's tonnage on air freight a year, approximately?
That's a good question, and I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
I forget if we display it by pounds or by 1,000 pounds.
Okay.
On the order of what airports usually handle in freight and cargo, it's not a lot.
Okay.
But it has been increasing, the so-called Amazon effect.
Okay. Thank you.
Noah, could you just give us some anecdotal information about the number of passengers? And I don't know what other metrics you use, but you know, your comment about 2020 to be an average, a slow day a little bigger than the busiest day you had in 17. You know, can you put that in some context?
Sure. So when I began, we had, and this was 4 or 5 years ago, we had 4 large air carrier parking spots, and we had our existing hold room, and we had 5 JetBlue aircraft operating a day, 1 United, 1 American, 1 Delta. So we had 8 large air carrier aircraft between 50 and 100 seats. On our peak days now, we will have 22 or 23 large air carrier aircraft operating in between all of the service additions, mostly on JetBlue, but also on American. The other item that equates to roughly peak days last summer saw between 1,500 to 1,800 passengers go through TSA screening. I don't have the numbers from 4 years ago, but I anticipate that that's a 4-fold increase. The other industry trend that really exacerbates that is there are these blocks in the industry, they're called flight banks. As air carriers have consolidated, as United bought Continental, as American and US Airways merged, there are fewer ways to connecting passengers. What's happened at these major super hubs that have developed is there are peak times called banks where these airports operate at 120% of their planned capacity, and then they have dead periods. The trickle-down effect to airports like Nantucket or the Vineyard or even Providence is in order to get those passengers out to the hubs to connect at their banks, all of those flights have to leave at the same time. I can best illustrate that anecdotally. Last year, Delta actually cut service overall. They cut from 20 to 7 flights a week. But as part of that cutting, they put on an extra Saturday section, which was actually more trouble for us than if they had kept their old schedule, because they had added service specifically to that Saturday block that was busy. I hope that goes some way to answer your question.
That helps. And then I was also curious in terms of the revenue mix for the airport over a year. If we looked at a pie chart, how much is, the commercial JetBlue American passenger revenue, FBO operations for private aircraft, I don't know, parking. Can you give us sort of scale some of those?
I want to try to do it without looking at our budget sheet. Our FBO revenue, including fuel, should account for consistently around 50% of our revenue. Airline landing fees and non-aeronautical rents have probably been 25% each. The major change to that I would assume is that the non-aeronautical revenue, the land rents, have been increasing. I would put those up at around 30 to 35% now. Yeah. Jamie, I'd be happy to follow up with that chart. We could do it exactly, but
It would just be helpful to get a sense as to how the airport earns its revenue over the course of the year.
it would be through the FBO, through corporate, general aviation, aircraft services, landing, ramp fees, fuel sales, non-aeronautical land rent after that.
The details on page 9. I mean, you have to pick through it. It's not a.
Well, right, that's what I say.
It's not on a pie chart,
Pie
but
chart would be great.
the numbers are
Okay,
there.
now it's, Thanks, though.
You're welcome. So, if you would like, I could go into a few highlights from the budget, fiscal 21 over fiscal year 20.
And also the capital, if we could go through the capital projects too, please, Noah.
Of course.
Thank you.
Maybe before we do that, can I ask a question about the non-aeronautical rents and a little more discussion of what that is?
Sure.
Is there unused capacity there? Is that number expected to grow in terms of renting more properties, or how's that all work?
So that's a very good question. It's a focus of the commission. They have strategic insight over that. Industry-wide non-aeronautical land rents, business parks, commercial development, in our case, bunker road tenants, airport gas, the airport parking lot, and a few properties on Sun Island Road are what's available. They're an important hedge against the volatility of air travel and air traffic. Our corporate general aviation base is very heavily tied to GDP. A hedge against market GDP for airports is to act more like land managers, and a big trend has been for them to develop land holdings. Nantucket has been no exception. We've pursued a number of new tenants in the bunker area. I have a few that I can name. Edgewater, new airport gas lease has come out. These have been very important, and the airport has a lot of land holdings available, but we think it's important to meter these out slowly as needed. It's really the airport's best and last hedge against volatility and for financial sustainability.
Do you know, are you at sort of 50% is in the rental pool and you have another 50% to go, or you have, in really broad numbers? I'm like,
We have a lot of land available, but it's not all shovel ready. The environmental permitting is a huge component of that. It's moving land from land that's been designated by the FAA as reserved for aeronautical use into a non-aeronautical use category, and then pursuing the environmental permitting on that. We have, of our shovel-ready land, which was originally roughly 10 acres, we've probably disposed of about 50 to 60% of it. So immediately, we probably capped at 4 to 5 acres.
thanks.
Obviously, fuel costs are affecting your biggest drop in revenue is that fuel's cheaper, I guess. But I did notice one thing on here. It looks like the parking lot has dropped precipitously since you've changed the way people pay. Is there thoughts about changing it back to some sort of system that's a little bit more restrictive?
No, there has been a drop, of course. What the budget item doesn't show is we've had amazing savings in staff time, not having to respond to and repair and maintain the unit. The management arrangement, the management contract is the most common in the industry. It's sort of the best compromise of control and revenue, and staff's recommendation would be to stay with the management contract. We have learned a lot in our first 3 years with Republic, and that contract is coming up for renewal or not for renewal, I'm sorry, for rebidding through the RFP process in the next 6 months. So I think there are gains to be made, and it would be through tightening up the terms of that RFP. However, the largest revenue component is the long-term parking, and as long as the Part 135 year-round Hyannis commuter market suffers, that line item will probably suffer.
You discussed a little bit that the highest level, the fourth and fifth page is, the one's called Airport Enterprise Fund actual budget for 2020 and the projected budget for 21. I'm just sort of curious, the airport showed a net earnings of $1.5 million for fiscal 19, and you're projecting a $400,000 loss for the current fiscal year is in a negligible. Is that just because you're trying to be conservative and kind of? And if so, can you tell me how 2020 is doing? Is it really, you're really going to lose 400,000?
There are two items. We are being a little bit conservative. We do forecast revenue conservatively. We also had a few one-time benefit sort of cash items that hit that revenue component. It was a TSA bag belt reimbursement, 2 reimbursements. Yeah, so $500,000 for a TSA bag belt reimbursement from 2008 when we installed our inline bag screening, bag belt and bag detection system. About $1.5 million of that was at our own cost. The reimbursement has been lagging to date, so $500,000 of that was.
Fiscal 19, or that's hitting fiscal 20? 19. So that was sort of an unexpected revenue. Right. And then I'm just sort of curious why the transfer from retained earnings occurs in fiscal 20. It's actually larger than the expected loss, and then it's even larger for 21. I'm just sort of curious why it's being accounted for that way.
Would you mind calling out the page number?
Page 4 and the PDF.
It shows that just looking at the current year budget, it was, it's $400,000 net loss. Transfer from retained earnings $670,000. Next year it's a gain of $49,000, but a transfer of $800,000. So I'm not quite sure I understand why you need to transfer it here. Next year if you're showing a profit.
Yes.
We're taking that under consideration.
Okay.
This is how it's supposed to look.
So that's actually not the information that we have. We might have to follow up offline or officially.
It's one of those, I didn't understand why the numbers look that way.
Yeah, I don't either.
If Jamie doesn't know, I don't know. I'll be honest.
I can show you what I have.
You can just.
You can just tell us, yeah.
No need that.
Take the whole presentation.
No. So we have a negative for 400,000 for net, for the transfer, and we compensate that with a PFC transfer to offset. And then, so we're budgeting at 0, like,
So you're still planning that you're gonna have an operating loss for fiscal 20,
yeah.
and you'll cover that out of retained earnings.
It's
to net it to zero.
not really out of retained earnings, we're transferring it out of our PFC reserve.
Which is covering debt service. So the PFC is allowed to cover prior projects from debt service. So it's not really a loss, they are transferring from the PFC fund and not retained earnings. They're two different funds. So the PFC is the passenger facility charge that they collect on the tickets. And that can be used to apply to future debt service or against prior approved projects, correct?
Prior.
So they've chosen to take every year $400,000 and not raise it in the revenue and transfer it from PFC, which is essentially covering for it. Because money's fungible, it doesn't know what dollar being applied against, but it's essentially covering $400,000 in debt service. Is the way to go.
Is that probably why next year the number will be the same reserve to cover?
Well, they generate the same amount roughly thereabouts PFC every year. I have to look because I'm trying to look on the presentation real quick here to see what's happening. But they're not going to generate. They won't generate. They can't generate net earnings because we never do. We've never created a scenario where an enterprise fund goes to town meeting with a budget that would raise more revenue than the immediate expenditures. So I think that,
Yeah, but the airport could, right?
well, they, on an actual basis, absolutely, but on a budgetary basis, no, they can't, because we wouldn't do it. If they had a budget of 10 million, they wouldn't budget to raise $10.5 million because we wouldn't budget to project. We wouldn't budget for a surplus. We would budget for a balanced budget. Okay, we don't do it. I mean, theoretically, you can do it, but we don't do it.
We can talk.
Yeah.
You can give me a lesson offline. Sorry, didn't mean to take up that much time.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not any closer to understanding what this page 4 is. Are you?
No. Like, why does it say it was limited?
I mean, I think we just heard that we don't transfer from retained earnings, we transfer from PFC, but we budgeted for it this year, or at least this sheet indicates that they did, and next year we are again. But we don't do that. So, I don't know. We don't transfer from retained earnings, we transfer from PFC.
Yeah, they're two distinct and different things.
I'm comfortable with that explanation. I'm not comfortable with what page 4 in our packet is.
We have to get you the revised version that I think that the airport sent us. I think that's the problem.
So should there be two separate lines, one for each?
Yeah, we would create two separate lines, one for PFC and one for retained earnings. That's fine. We just have to make a revised page 4 because evidently this is not correct. Which I did not know when this went out. So we'll revise page 4 to show you what is actually happened for 20 and then 21.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll send that out tomorrow to you.
Yeah. And that retained earnings figure is accurate. There is approximately 3.5 million.
That was certified as of July 1st by DOR when they were here in October. So it's effective as of July 1st, but yes, it was certified in the first week of October.
Good.
So,
Good.
That's it.
Good if they don't have to transfer $800,000 every.
I mean, is it fair to say that the airport, even though the airport would never budget for a profit, is actually doing well, and if they could budget for a profit, they would show one?
it is
That's
fair
probably
to say
stupid
that the
English, but-
airport is doing much better than they were previously, and that the current administration is working very hard to continue to get the understanding of the revenue and expenditures of the allocations. And I would not go out on a limb and say that if they could, they would budget for a surplus, because that would be somewhat of me being able to predict what air service would actually look like for the year, and I don't want to attempt to do that. But they historically have been able to generate a surplus based on the conservative nature of the way that they have budgeted. And some of that, I think, Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of that is based on the way that they look at the fuel revolver and the amount that will come out over the cap of 5.2 million into their operating budget. So, and if that's not correct, let me know, but I'm pretty sure it is. So, it's probably safe to say, Joe, that they may be able to generate a surplus, but I don't think it's something that we expect every year.
No. What was your peak passenger count back when Cape Air and Island Air and all those guys were flying against what it is today?
Annually or monthly?
I can think annually.
Annually?
Yeah.
It was well over 200,000 passengers.
And what is it today?
125 or 135,000.
Wow. So the High Line's the benefit of your reduction.
I would say so.
Yeah.
How much is still owed on the support that the town put into the airport enterprise fund X years ago? I mean, the 235 that's being paid back every year, or at least budgeted for the last 2 years.
What was the question? Sorry.
How much is left on the advance or whatever we term it? That the town
Somewhere in the order of 3 to 4 million.
3.5 million. I mean, the ultimate final agreement that was amended and the board adopted that the FAA approved was, I think, 3.8 or 3.9 million. They disallowed, ultimately, after a lot of work by the airport, they disallowed about $600,000 worth of transfers. So the town is going to recoup about 3.9 million. The agreement has been in place for 3 years, I think. So the way the agreement works is they budget 235,000, but as they do projects, there's material that resides on the airport property that the DPW can reclaim and use in some of their projects. So every year we review and we use the District 5 over on the District 5 Mass DOT pricing sheet for that type of material, and when the trucks are loaded, every ton that we take is then it's offset against that. So all told, the town will get $235,000 annually. It may be $100,000 in cash and $135,000 in material, but there's about 3.5 million or something like that left on the deal. It runs for another 17 or 18 years. It's a while before we actually get all of it back. But the way that we're doing is a benefit because we're not paying $110 a ton for the material that we can take from the airport project. So it works out good. It's a worthwhile way to do it.
Remember that from next year.
Who's your airport performance comp? Is it Martha's Vineyard or Hyannis or Provincetown? Like who is the benchmark, or is there one?
There isn't a specific benchmark. One of the items we're trying to put forward is to reconstitute a seasonal airport service group in our industry. We benchmark with Aspen, Vail, mostly Intermountain West ski resorts.
Thank you.
Benchmarking, actual rates are one item, but costs are another. The Rocky Mountain FBOs tend to be a good benchmark because they have such a high cost of fuel for trucking it overland and up mountain.
So it matches to that.
Right. They actually tend to be better than the Vineyard or Hyannis or Stowe.
Fair. Okay. Second question, on your I don't know, the position ID sheet where you have, is just in some of the places it shows zeros, but there still is a person who has a step and many years of service.
That is a work in progress.
I wasn't sure if it was like an open position.
Yeah, we've been working with the finance department to get because there's issues with the unions.
Great, thank you.
Noah, the AIP projects on capital expenses of 6.1 million. Could you just give us a quick overview on what those are, please?
Sure. So that block for 6.1 million is, it's showing 2 million that was previously appropriated ATM for our safety and security project, plus an additional 4 million in supplemental. Bids were high, the same old, song and dance, the cost of island construction, increasing TSA requirements, escalated that job.
So a job that was originally 2 million had an escalation of an additional 4 million.
Our original engineer estimate put it at 2 million, which informed the borrowing, and yes, we had to go for an additional 4.
Thank you.
And know that the 6 million, that's the gross amount of the projects, and does that still have the 80-20 or 90-10 that's split between what the town or the enterprise fund absorbs and the FCC pays, FAA pays for?
So yes and no. Yes, that is the gross amount, and yes, it is an AIP reimbursed project. The caveat is there's a territory fight between the FAA and TSA. It gets down into the details. FAA will fund A, but not B, or not C, but it will if C is +1, for example. FAA won't fund security fencing unless it's in the terminal. Then it can be 6 feet and have barbed wire. If it's 100 feet from the terminal, they'll only fund 4 feet of it. What it does is it changes the eligibility matrix. Instead of being a typical 95% total cost share, by the time you get down into the details, the items that are FAA ineligible, that the state might pick up at a different regard, it ends up being somewhere in the range of a 50 to 75% reimbursable project. We're going through that exercise now. We're budgeting conservatively for our own work at a total 50% reimbursement. We hope it's higher. But
That's on the 6 million.
That's on the 6 million.
And that particular, but other projects may go back, or it's going to depend on each particular project.
Most any other AIP project will be reimbursed at 95% between the FAA and state DOT. Security projects exist in their own different calculation world, unfortunately.
And the fuel farm rehab, same, because it says supplemental, so it's 1.1
So
million rounding up.
yes, this would be a our money project. This is to replace the piping, the cabinets, and the fire suppression on the fuel farm. $500,000 of that cost would be from transfer from our retained earnings, and $500,000 through borrowing.
Okay.
One of the cost escalators on that is replacing the fire suppression system. It's currently, we took it offline. It's a fire suppression system backed by PFAS-containing foam.
Okay.
And getting rid of that was expensive.
Thank you. I think we talked about this last year as well,
Correct.
if I remember. Okay.
You mentioned rebuilding the taxiway for the main runway. That's not in this year's plan?
That was already appropriated at ATM 18 or 19
Oh, okay.
last year.
19.1 million.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions for Noah and Jamie and
Yeah, just one. What did you budget for the loss in revenue for how did you budget losing the revenue from Rectrix?
That's a very good question. I believe we budgeted a total loss on the order of 100,000 to 150,000. It's a hit for sure, but as a lot of that we budgeted as coming through the parking line item for revenue. As a year-round operator, Rectrix, they're the beneficiary of a number of incentives and fee rebates for providing year-round service. So it's not actually as large of an impact as a lot of people would think financially, because we don't try to make a lot of revenue on year-round air taxi service. And Jenny's right, they also didn't take any fuel. They operate their own FBO in Hyannis. So there's no fuel loss associated with that service loss.
Is there any chance they're coming back?
They're leaving that item open. I know that they're looking at a different service pattern with a different aircraft. The King Air 200, 300 is extraordinarily expensive to operate and has an operating cost of about $1,900 an hour. As you all know, with Hyannis traffic, it's one-way traffic. One of the successes that Cape Air has had is that they have a well-developed route tree, that they don't rely specifically on one route. We certainly hope to see them back. They were great to work with. They worked well with the community.
Is there anybody else talking to you about potentially coming to Nantucket?
Yes, but hopefully soon that announcement will be theirs, not one that I can make for them.
Would that be a private airline or a public airline, or a commercial airline?
It would be a commercial airline.
Good. Anything else? And I say no. Okay, thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
Jamie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so Brian, you'll get us a new page 4. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right, so next is the public school budget starting at 5 o'clock. Until then, we can do one of two things. We can either go through some of the citizen warrant articles that I believe are ready for potentially voting. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I like this.
It was coming
I like this.
slowly.
I know it was coming slowly because I was trying to catch up on my notes here. Or we can talk about, we have 20 minutes, we can talk about how we want to do the public information sessions, the public information session in March. Because I thought it would be helpful if we all laid out how we think it could work. And then with that, we're all in agreement on how it could work. Rather than somebody, beaver away in the background and say, here's how it is, and then we all go, yuck. So, what would you prefer to do?
That's urban you were talking about before.
Yeah, I know.
Can I ask a question, actually?
Yes.
Have you had any of the people you've invited to come in just flatly turn you down?
I've had to chase them because they don't answer me.
Are there?
So I've had to chase them and
Have you
to
had any
remind them, and
either turn you
then
down, or have you had any that you're done chasing?
no, I'm not done chasing yet because we need to see them. So I am diligent
How
in
about
chasing.
Act Now? Have they given you an answer?
Act Now is going to come in on the 28th and give us an update. So, yeah, so I continue to chase, and the chasing is 50% successful so far. So, yeah, and I will continue to chase. And then at some point, we will say we tried 5 times to get you in here, so we're ruling
Absolutely.
without your input.
Next year, we should
So.
divide that, so you don't have all that responsibility.
With any luck, next year, it won't be 53 citizens warrant articles.
Yeah, probably 106, the way Nantucket's moving.
But I like you did not say it wouldn't be your job.
I didn't say that, well, yeah, it's too soon to say on that one. Next year, who's ever in charge of that, we can all share. How's that? Okay, so,
Well, just on the information sessions,
Yes.
I just might as well,
Let's do
I
that.
really think they're kind of a waste of time. I mean, I just don't think you're gonna get much uptake. I did think that the video discussions that a bunch of folks on the committee did last year were helpful for some of the more complicated articles, but, I mean, if we wanna do one and see what happens, I guess trying is worth a try, but I'm just afraid you're gonna end up, like a lot of Civic League meetings where 3 people show up, so.
I think definitely we should just plan for one. And then if there's 1,000 people in the room, because, I'm always an optimist, then we schedule a second one. And when there's 4 people in the room, when they all get nameplates, because that's it, then we don't schedule the second one for sure. So, yeah, that would be I agree with that, Joe. I did like the videos too. I thought the videos were helpful, and they probably get watched more. We have no way of, for some reason, we have no way of knowing how many people watch stuff. But I think someone knows that, not me.
How do we advertise?
We would advertise this on the town website, and then we'd have to see if we could put it in the Inky Mirror, as part of, I'd have to talk to Libby and see
Maybe
what,
the radio would be good.
and on
too.
the radio,
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Joanna can put it on her show.
I'm happy to.
great. So how do we imagine this actually working? Somebody lay it out. Stephen, Like how I volunteered him?
Honestly, I think the reception here is such that I don't think it's going to work. I think that this works if there's enthusiasm and people want to do it, and when there's a lot of public outreach about it, and not to anybody's, I'm not laying fault anywhere. Maybe the idea is not good, but there's not the enthusiasm that I think is going to lead to a good public discussion. So how's it going to work? I don't think it's going to work.
So I would say, when you describe this, the very nascent notion here of sort of the town getting in the room and hashing it out a little bit beforehand, that to me sounded interesting. When the next directive was, well, it can't be that format, it has to be sort of narrowly on the issue without any kind of crosstalk, then to me it seemed, it kind of lost its value.
I agree.
So
I
that's-
think that the crosstalk needs to be a
Yeah.
part of it,
Okay.
or people aren't going to come.
Okay.
And maybe people won't come anyway, but I think the whole value is that you can get a proponent and a detractor and us saying, why we opined the way we did.
Okay.
So are you saying, should we invite all the people that we rejected their articles and ask them to come if they want to defend them?
I mean, everybody should be invited.
I know. but
Every
I mean,
person.
Specifically, let them know that they're going to be allowed to speak, essentially. That's what I'm talking about, because normally they might not be. Like the Chamber of Commerce, or is it the Chamber of Commerce who does it?
Specifically?
Specifically, when they do it, do they just go through each one and explain it? Do they let people talk from the audience?
They choose a dozen articles, and they have sort of a pro and a con and a moderator. Whereas, what I envisioned was go through every article that anybody wants to talk about until we're done talking about it. I don't think that's going to take all night. I really don't, because I don't think people would be there to do it.
I think this idea got shut down, but I can't remember why. I mean, so why at town meeting when we make our motion and Stephen, you make the motion, Stephen seconds it. Why can't we have for the, I don't know, let's say there are 15 articles that have some level of either complexity or controversy. Why can't we either one of us stand up and read the comment or just say, we voted in favor because of A, B, and C.
Well,
Just
so
to
whoever
start the
whoever
because the-
calls the article, and it could be one of us, gets 5 minutes, and then everybody else gets 2 minutes. So if we want to, if we think that there's going to be big discussion, the select board does this on occasion when there's a big article that they know is going to get a lot of back and forth. They introduce it themselves. So we have that opportunity. It just hasn't been anybody's wish, I guess.
I'm unclear on the piece of this so are we interested in putting forth our opinions about the articles we voted against or the articles that we voted for?
Both.
Oh,
It would be a potential explanation of our ruling for anyone who's interested in understanding more than what our comment is, or if it says, so for example, the bicycle database. We said motion not to adopt, Article O as of now.
Right.
It will change to a number
Sure,
in the
Dawn,
warrant.
we have an audience member.
And so if someone comes in and says, why did you vote against the database? Why did you say motion not to adopt? We would explain.
So it's not really about 53 articles. When this boils down to it, it is really gonna be about 15, say. I'm just gonna use that
Yeah.
number arbitrarily.
Could be 15 to 20,
So
sure.
you know how at the town meeting, Cormac, when he was the head of the other environmental
Land council.
Yes, he would have a little handout that said, these are the articles that the land council is interested in, and he would give the little things. Why don't we just have a little handout at the town meeting that says, on these 15 articles, a little more of the in-depth explanation? Then people can read it right when they're there.
They could, and they won't, because they have 47 other
Put it
handouts.
right behind the Act Now one.
Right. No, I mean, honestly, there's going to be land council, town administration's going to do one. You're going to have Act Now doing one, and then all the Bruce Mandel's going to have a pamphlet. Everybody has
So
one.
he won't.
What I would like to facilitate is a discussion and have people get to ask questions and give them a chance to have them answered before we get to town meeting. So
I mean, I'm not saying I think this is a bad idea. I might be in the minority on that, but what you're talking about is more of a debate.
no, I don't think a discussion is a debate.
It could be.
Dawn wants to say something. I'm sorry, she's been.
I just wanted to say something about the speaking at town meeting, because for my first couple of years on the board, we didn't say that much. But last year we seemed to get, I think it was last year we seemed to get up and say a lot more.
You did.
And people were really happy about that. And I think the finance committee could definitely vocalize things more, and I think it would be really well received, in terms of, you know, it's one thing to read the comment, but getting a little bit more color from the sort of the appropriate person to speak on it, can really have a big impact.
I'm
But
so,
I think we should try the forum too. If it's a flop, then you don't do it next year.
I'm so confused by the commenting part, because I have so many memories of David getting up and defending the FinCom's position on questions that are called.
Yeah.
I felt like it was a matter of course on almost every question that got called. Like, I could see David standing up and saying, and sort of paraphrasing the discussions we had.
But that only happened last year.
No,
No.
'cause I wasn't even on.
It didn't only happen last year, but it does happen on just a
Rare.
few.
Yes, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
it's rare, because I also wondered,
Yeah.
how come we didn't do that more often?
I mean, I just, you know,
I thought it was a
sort of,
time
as Dawn says, I mean, you know, the finance committee has a certain level of authority with certain voters in town, and to stand up and say, we voted to take no action because of, you know, it doesn't have to be a 10-minute speech, it can be a
Right.
minute, and just summarize your position, and at least you've started the discussion with, we went through all this work, we discussed the pros and cons of the various factors, and we decided X. So,
I think, I see it as an and, to be honest. I don't see the saying more at town meeting is
It's a vote.
is an and. It's not an or to the public forum. And I'm comfortable with the public forum being more of a discussion back and forth. My one reservation that kind of makes the fur stand up on the back of my neck is the idea that we're not, just to be very clear from the outset, we're not reopening it. It's closed, right? So at the decision is the decision. So you can come in and we can debate and discuss it some more, and the decision will not change. So as long as we put down the ground rules up front, so people don't have expectations that we're reopening this. Because that's where
But the warrant will have already gone to print,
right, I realize that. I'm just,
and to the general citizens coming to this, anything can be discussed on the town meeting floor and changed or adopted or modified.
correct.
well, I agree with your position on that, Denise, that, you know, the decision is the decision.
Right.
But then I sort of throw it back to Stephen, so then why the heck do you want to come to a discussion where, you know, well, if I'm either the proponent or the opponent of an article, and I'm not gonna change anybody's mind, why am I gonna take an hour of my time, or 2 hours of my time to sit there and bat it back and forth when you're not gonna change it?
Yeah,
I mean, whereas on the
I
town
think
meeting floor, you could-
9,900 people will agree with you, but maybe we'll get 50 who come.
And maybe people who had nothing to do with any of the articles and are just interested to know what FinCom thinks. That's the audience I think we're appealing to.
There's no one even at town meeting that fits that.
People that think we have a lot more power
There's a
than we
lot
really
of
do.
them here.
And when we get 800 people, we will quickly vote on everything.
We're getting a crowd, what are you talking about?
We had fans.
Free popcorn's working.
So we have just a couple minutes before we'll turn it over to hello superintendent. Nice to see you. Good, thank you. So let's do this is what it'll look like. People come in, we set the ground rules. You know, this is to have a healthy debate on all the rulings that have happened up till now, or a discussion. You tell us which ones you want to talk about, and we will then elaborate on why we decided what we decided. We will all take turns picking ones that we would discuss, so it wouldn't be just one person speaking. And we would have people talk for 5 minutes, follow that format. I think it would work for the people who are asking questions or want to say something. Because we will also want to time bound it. We don't want to be 30 minutes on to pick on the one I just used, a bicycle database. Does that make sense? We'll have one person on FinCom be moderator or stopwatch keeper, right? And
Maybe we could get Bobby to come, ring his bell. Bobby Planzer.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he might like
When
that.
he does the
Yeah, he does
he's
the bell if you
yes, he does.
if you've talked
He
too
was
long.
getting excited about it now.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
so we can add some pageantry. It'll be fun. For everyone.
Pageantry.
Maybe some snacks.
Snacks are always good. So, okay. All right, so I think we're on for March 12th. It will be more back and forth. So, and we will set some ground rules up front, which.
Okay, so we're not scheduling two. We're gonna
Scheduling
invite
one.
everybody who wants to talk about anything, come to the first one. If we don't get to, come to the next one.
Right.
Great.
Is that okay? I will put down, I think so, yes.
4 o'clock?
Yes, please. Hopefully we can get a room. So we'll be having it in the parking lot in the March and that'll curtail it
need this room.
quickly. Yes. Ally, do we know if we can get this room for March 12th?
I already reserved it.
You're a star, Ally, as always. So,
We already had a meeting.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we had.
I know, but I'm just making sure
Yeah,
again.
that's fine.
Okay.
And it's 4, right? 4 to
Yes.
7.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. And what I will do between now and our meeting on Thursday is I will draft up a proposed ground rules, a couple simple ground rules, and then we can just review them and modify them on Thursday, so we have them.
Great.
Is that okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Are we all here, school committee, school
I'm not sure that
board?
everybody's here, but I think we're ready when you are, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and it would be great if you could do introductions if everyone's here, please.
And that's going to test my,
And we all have name, the reason why I'm starting
But
with you
that's
is because
fair.
we all have name tags, so we're easy to figure out.
I did bring a paper copy per sheet, for those of you who like paper.
Yes, thank you.
And if not, I'm sure you have, many of you have it up on your.
We do, we have it on our screens, but paper would be excellent. Thank you.
Make notes or whatever.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's one of my favorite charts.
A lot of great charts in this, so I'll go back to your,
Yeah.
you keep in the folder and use.
Yeah, when people ask how Nantucket's changing, I just go back.
I
You want me
know.
on the mic? I imagine.
Yes, please. We can move it over. Would you like a chair so you don't have to stand up the whole time?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
I've been sitting too much today, so this is good. So thank you for having us here today. I would like to introduce members of the administrative team and leadership team, as well as school committee members. The first person I would like to introduce is Dr. Elizabeth Hallett, who is the deputy superintendent, and this is her first year here as she goes through things like the budget and negotiations and preparations for next year. And we have Jen Erickson, our technology director, and Michelle Brady Bobear, our special education director. I don't want to miss Martin Engwaloff, our finance director, who will be turning slides for us. Michael Horton, the director of curriculum for our district, and whatever other hats we tend to give him. Julie Lamoli, our CPS principal, middle school principal. And Kim Kubish, the elementary school principal. And Eve Marie McNeil, the intermediate school principal. And Tracy Roberts, the community school director. And then we have at this moment 3 members of the school committee, Zona Tanner Butler, Steve Sordovic, and Dr. Timothy Lepre,
Thank you.
and a host of others. Oftentimes, this actually is the second time they've sort of sat through this, but you never know what a new group might ask for questions. And if you drill down too far, I'll look to them. I'll stutter a little bit and then look to them. I'm using a format that we have used for 10 years now since I came in, that has seemed to work for the school committee and FinCom. The PowerPoint will hit some highlights for you, and you also have a great deal of backup information from Martin that really drills down. Our numbers every year all start with a look at our enrollment. And the first slide that you will see is how enrollment has changed over the 10 years, at least, that I've been here. The increase from 1289 to 1683 this year is significant. That's 400 students in less than 10 years. Pretty remarkable for a small school district. That said, go back, Martin. I would point out that our October numbers this year are a little bit less than last October for the first time in 10 years. And with all the jokes about job security, we're happy for some leveling of those numbers for the first time, and it'd be nice to sort of maintain those numbers instead of the increases of 50 to 100 students a year. Because when you're increasing 50 to 100 a year, your budget is chasing just that enrollment increase and not new programs. The 1725 is a projection, so we won't know until next October what that number is. But we do know that our numbers are rolling through the high school. The big numbers are rolling right now through the middle school, and in 3 years, they'll be rolling through the high school. In this next slide, it's fun you can look at this a lot of different ways. You can follow the 12th grade from 1999 down and see that we've doubled in that time, or you can do that with any grade, or you can go across. You can look at the overall numbers if you want, or you can look at the end, or you can look at the demographic shift that we have experienced on the island as well. Those are pretty stark changes in a short amount of time. And it's something that we know, but we don't really know until we look at something like this to see just how significant is that shift. Okay? And I'll stop at any point if you have questions about it. Then
I'm guessing that there's implications for education in general when the demographic shifts so significantly.
There certainly is. For example, with the increase in the Hispanic speaking, we have an increase in ELL. Mm-hmm. But I'm always cautious to say we should not assume that all of our Spanish speaking or identified ethnic group are not non-English speaking. Mm-hmm. Because that is not the same. And so we'll see that in a minute as we look a little deeper. Sure.
I have heard this said. Is it true that we're the second most diverse school system in the state of Massachusetts?
I think that depends on the measure that you want to look at. So my immediate reaction would be no. Lawrence, Lowell, Quincy, New Bedford, there are schools with greater diversity. However, I would say if you're looking at a small school population, we may be the second most diverse for such a small subset, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Okay. The ELL population has grown. When I arrived, I think we had 65 students that I knew about. And today we have 260 students in that population. They represent a lot of different countries and different languages. We have a projection of 260 for next year. What's interesting is that you will look at that and think, okay, it peaked in 2017 and 18 with that number 293, and then going down to 286 and 248. What you may or may not know is that as non-English speaking students come into our district, we work very hard to give them the services so that they are no longer identified as ELL. So in a couple of years there, we flipped, which is a term that we use for former language. Limited English proficient, right? So that's where you see sometimes dips because we've been successful. We have been very successful when we get children of any ethnicity or any language when they come in kindergarten and first grade. By the time they graduate, they are doing very well, and they are bilingual, which not all of our students can claim to be. The challenge in recent years are the number of children that are coming in at middle school and high school without English. And that's a subset of this population, but it's a greater challenge to us in the districts. Imagine a child coming into the high school without speaking English who has to take the science MCAS in his or her first year. I mean, I can't imagine. I learned French, and I cannot imagine taking an exam in France and in French. So there are challenges within there. You can see the numbers for each school. Always, the elementary school has been the largest ELL population, and that continues today. Special education numbers, you can see gone from 225, a little up and down to a projection of 295 for next year. Those numbers, at least for next year, are a projection. They are pretty close to the state average percent. So I don't know, Michelle, 14, 15, 16%?
The state average is 18%, the national average is 14%. So
Okay.
they're trying to get us to decrease that. I think ours is probably hovering around closer to moving up to 17%.
Right.
Was our criteria different back in 10 years ago than it is today, what it is?
No, I don't think the criteria was different, but I think that we get better at early identification. And then sometimes there are new handicaps that are recognized, but I think in the past they were probably captured in other ways with some of our population. I think the challenge here is, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the students coming into the schools with mental health issues and or mental health issues in their homes. That is the greatest challenge facing us right now, and the island's lack of resources for those children and their families. We had a meeting today where we were talking about with Fair Winds and Gosnold, and there is concern with the lack of counselors that are available in some of the, not just the school counselors, but the community counselors, and the inability to meet the needs of families on the island.
So we are keeping trend then, because I think we've seen this over the last couple of years. Roughly 30% of the overall population in any class then is either English as a second language or learning challenged, disabled, whatever special education required.
I don't know, Joanna. I think I would want to check that before I blindly said yes. I think it depends on the particular grade level. You may find that in a kindergarten grade, but that might not be the case in the sixth grade. So I'd be reluctant to deny or confirm that without looking further.
Because it's not, maybe not evenly spread out.
Right. Yeah. But, and then of course you have some children who are dual identified.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Right.
What is out of district?
Out of district, there are a small number of children that we are unable to serve here. Their needs are such that we have to send them to a residential program. We have tried over the years to reduce that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, but we've tried, and we have. If you look at, we had 11 in 2014, 15, and 6 today, and that's because we've added programs in-house. But there are times when even your in-house programs can't meet the needs of the children. Okay. So in this budget, I'll tell you what you already know, the last year's budget of $30,136,642 and this year's budget of $31,796,642 projects to an increase of $1,660,000. We did note there, though, that 160 of that is for a one-time expense in technology this year. Then just letting you see the operating budget for the school committee over the years from 2012 to 2020. And I think this is a...
Can I go just on the back, on the last
Sure,
slide?
Chris.
I mean, I'm sort of doing the math in my head, but have you guys talked about what an annual percentage that equates to, or average annual percentage growth?
Average has been a little over 4%. This year it's 5.5%.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think to understand the increase in the operating budget, you always have to look at the increase in the enrollment alongside it, because that's what usually, dictates that change. In the next slide, another way to look at it is, you went backwards, there you go, per pupil expenditure. This is on a formula determined by the State Department. You can see that both the state and the Nantucket Public Schools has gone up in that time. Actually, if you look at 2009-10, our per pupil expenditure was greater than any year but the most recent on this list, 2017 and 18.
So that's an average number. I'm sorry, were you going to continue?
No, I was going to say that is based. So the what changes the per pupil expenditure is not only what you're adding to the budget, but your enrollment.
Yep, sure.
So in 2009 and 10, our enrollment went down, and so that's going to make the per pupil expenditure go up.
So that's a state average number. And is this number published do you have access to all schools on a school-by-school basis?
We do.
And where do we rank in the school? And I don't know if big schools and small schools are different, but where do we rank in public schools?
Yeah, we're up there. I think it depends on the and
I hope we're up there. But
yeah, I mean, we're not in 1, 2, or 3. There are districts. What you have to be careful about is that there are some really tiny districts that have really high per pupil expenditures because maybe they send their high school students to another community and they factor that in. Martha's Vineyard, which is probably the closest comp that we have, is they're split up into, I think, 5 different districts because they all feed into one high school, regional high school, but they're separate districts. But they are, one is a little bit higher, one's a little bit lower than we are.
I think in the future, I'll say you, maybe next year, it would be interesting to see that list and where we sit in that top quintile, because
it
we should be pretty much near the top, accepting outliers.
You're right. It is close. I think the State Department puts you into groups called comps. So you can go online into the department the education department, and find what the comps are for Nantucket. And the first year that I came, I looked at that, and one of our comps was Weston. Now, I graduated from Weston High School, and I said, time out. And I called the department, I said, help me understand your formula that makes Nantucket and Weston a comp. And part of it is per pupil expenditure, so ours is up there. Part of it is per capita income. It's also the percentage of ELL students. And when they said that, I said, okay, time out again. Their ELL students are not our ELL students. And their ELL students are Chinese, high-performing students that add to their scores in many cases. So it's interesting. So I just say, if you're going to go do that and look at the comps, take it with a grain of salt, and you really want to do some more in-depth research on that. But it's interesting.
There's one last question. This, I'll let it go. Do you have access to comps by department? So can you look at and see how we compare on a per pupil for, say, athletic spending or for special needs? Or
I don't know that we could drill that far. I think we could probably do it for special needs. I don't know that we could do it for athletic spending. I'm gonna look to Martin. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I don't think they do that deep, but I can send a sheet.
Just
Yeah.
curious.
And I think within your question is obvious. Running an island school 30 miles out to sea is a very different proposition than running a school in America.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Right.
If you had these comps, could you strip out kind of island-specific expenses and sort of get to a more apples-to-apples cost of living expense, which is also increased here, but is different from the cost of running an island school?
Right. You're exactly right. So, for example, the things we can't do, being an island school, we don't belong to a vocational consortium that allows you to go to this district if you want to go into auto mechanics, this district 15 miles over here if you want to go into horticulture, or this district if you want to go into building trades. So we don't have an area vocational program. We are it. So we have to develop that. You can't use a special education day program consortium the way that you can on the mainland and send children there. If we have to send children out, it's a residential. It's not a day program because they're not going to take the boat and come back every day. Our athletics is another area that is considerably more expensive because every away game is a ferry ride and a bus ride, and we are paying for officials to come over on the ferry or on the plane. So there are things, economy of scale, that we don't have, but there are advantages that I would like to think offset that. That's why we're here. Okay, moving forward, this is a Chapter 70 historical comparison. This would take about an hour lecture to explain how Chapter 70 works. I'm going to give Martin about a 2-minute opportunity to fill you in on that. And what's interesting is that there could be a real change in Chapter 70 based on some recent things done by the governor.
So Chapter 70 calculation starts with a foundation budget for each school district. Once that foundation budget is determined, there is different factors that go into play. There is the wage adjustment factor that changes yearly for Massachusetts. There is an inflation factor that's taken into consideration. And for the local contribution, it starts with the property valuation of the real estate value of Nantucket. Then there is a income and municipal revenue growth factor. So all these metrics are very different from each other, and they're combined into a formula that was designed back in the 90s to help districts that are struggling to meet the foundation needs. The purpose of the foundation budget is to provide adequate education for everybody. So that's what the Chapter 70 wants to fill, is this gap. A lot of districts get huge amount of Chapter 70. We usually have been around 18 to 20% of the foundation budget. Now, granted, the foundation budget that the Department of Education comes up with for Nantucket is much lower than our actual budget. So that's in a gist what it is. Right now, the formula is being reevaluated. It has become overly complex, and they're trying to simplify and include factors such as English language learner population. This is a major factor that's coming into play into the Chapter 70, and we're waiting to see the first draft within the next 2 weeks to see what the recommendations will be for Chapter 70 for the current year. So for the upcoming year, actually.
So this is funding that comes from the state?
Yes.
You could argue it's our money coming back to us, but that depends on how you view that.
So how do we, I'm sorry, what was the name of the town that you went to high school in?
Weston.
How would we compare to Weston in this, in contribution from the state?
I can get you that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Are you expecting it to go up or down with the new rules?
It's hard to tell. We've gotten very generous increases in the past 3 years, and state is considers Nantucket one of the well-off districts, meaning that they feel that there is a local contribution that's sufficient to satisfy these needs. So their percentage, they want to stay within 17.5% of the foundation budget number. Again, I want to make a point, for calculation purposes, the foundation budget number for FY20 was a little over $19 million. Obviously, our budget is higher. So,
Thank you.
About $349,000 more per year in Chapter 70 than we did.
Thank you.
It's not fair.
Gold star. Just happened to know.
The cherry sheet section doesn't
Didn't
tell
tell you?
the population is similar, but
2,138 students, and their average is 24,506 per person.
That's interesting.
You have to remember those per pupil expenditures that you're looking at are 2 years ago, because those numbers don't come out that quickly, right? Okay, the next is just some of the federal grant money that we get. We get a large grant for IDEA, which is our special education grant that we use it for a number of things. Title I is, in our case, remedial reading, and Title II is often used for professional development. We use it for our mentoring program. Title III is the money provided based on your ELL enrollment. And then Title IV, which used to be in existence years ago, and then it dried up. That's for innovative and safe and drug-free schools. So it's a small amount that we have for that. For the first year in presenting, we've applied for Perkins, and that is for vocational funds. This is our budget as we break it into departments. You'll see each school is pretty close to the same percentage, with the high school being larger. That's pretty common throughout the Commonwealth. Your high school has certain programs that you may not find in the elementary and intermediate levels. Central office, technology, athletics, and facilities. And then we always break it out into payroll and expenses. If you look at the individual schools, the payroll to expenses is even more stark. Most of the payroll in the schools at the school level is 97, 98%. compared to 2% in expenses.
Roughly how many open positions do you have at this time?
We just filled one today, I think. We probably have 2 positions that are unfilled at this time.
Thank you.
Yep. And then in the budget development, we give parameters to the administrative team. They are linked to the district and school goals, looking at enrollments and the needs of the students, asking building principals to identify essential services. And our school committee and administrative team is committed to sustaining support for the whole child, the development of the physical, social, and emotional, not just the intellectual. We've worked hard to make sure that our budgets are based on actuals. Martin will give all department heads and principals a printout of what they've expended in each line over the last 3 to 5 years. What we're trying to do is eliminate line item transfers. We expect transfers in April and May and June as you get near the end of the year, but you shouldn't be making transfers in September and October. If you're making transfers in September and October, then you're not budgeting properly. And so we've worked very hard to change that. We also are looking very carefully at our utility expenses to make sure that they are budgeted properly. Diane O'Neill does a nice job. And the intermediate school has just been online a short time, so figuring that out is a little bit easier with this budget than it was last year and 2 years ago. These are the increases over the next 2 slides that we have presented in this budget, sort of in a quick look for you. At Nantucket Elementary School, small increase in instructional technology, adding an EL teacher. That is the school, if you'll remember, with the highest enrollment of ELL students, and we need to add a teacher there. Also adding a pre-K teacher and a pre-K teaching assistant. We are working towards, in all transparency, universal preschool for all 4-year-olds. That is something that we need to accomplish. And right now, it's probably a space issue as much as it is a budget issue.
How many students do you think that would be if tomorrow it was up and running?
So if, that's a great question. If normally our class sizes range from 100 to 150, but generally in the last few years we've seen 115. Let's use that as an average. I don't expect if we had 115 out there that we would have 115 coming to us, because there are parents that we know will opt for a private preschool over a free half-day program, and that's fine. That's great. We just want to make sure that there are no 4-year-olds who don't have any options. Mm-hmm. And so my best guess, maybe 75, 80 students.
Okay.
And if you hold us to it, then we'll have Beth try to explain that away. At the intermediate school.
What does that mean in terms of space? Do you know?
Well, in the elementary school today, we have 3 classrooms taken up with administration. We have the ELL office over there. We have the special education office over there, and we have a conference room over there. So To accomplish universal preschool, we need to move those 3 programs out of that school, and then they have the space to do that. So that will happen either with adding to the existing central office and bringing those people over to the central office, or if and when it's time to build a new school, you could roll administrative offices into a new school, providing that.
Thank you.
At NIS, some supplies and funding in technology. We'd like to increase, we have a part-time Spanish teacher who teaches, I think it's the 5th and 4th grades presently in Spanish. And then by adding this 0.2 full-time equivalent, we would be able to offer it for the 3rd grade as well in that school. And then a half-time social worker. And that speaks to the challenge that we have with Chinese or another world language. We would like to add 0.6 FTE for a technology teacher. We have a 0.4 on the books, but we haven't been able to hire somebody for a 0.4 position. Nobody's going to leave America and come over here for a 0.4 position. So by doing this, I think it'll increase our chances of filling that position.
I mean, I guess that's something where someone retires to Nantucket and they were a teacher and want to work part-time, that's probably your population that would be eligible or considered.
It might, and we had hoped, but it didn't happen.
It hasn't happened
this
yet.
year. So, and just because somebody is adept at using technology does not necessarily mean they're adept at teaching
Sure.
The use or supporting teachers in the use of technology.
Yep.
And then a special ed teaching assistant for a program at the middle school. Moving to the high school, adding a special ed teacher. That special ed teacher is in a program called the IDSC. That's for children with more intensive special needs. We have a program up there, and you have to watch your age ranges in your special needs programs. And that age range is growing because in that program, you have children who don't graduate at 18. They graduate after reaching their 22nd birthday. So if you're not careful, you can have an age range from 14 to 22, which is not going to work for the Department of Education nor the children. There's some smaller expenses, increases in supplies and technology, professional development, ELL, professional services and professional development, a special ed team chair, that's for the district to serve 2 schools to run the number of IEP meetings that we're trying to handle. And then in technology, you'll see the increase in funding for technology hardware. That's that one-time expense in this appropriation that the town made available to us.
It's good to see the investment in the ELL and the special ed. I think it's been needed.
It is. It's a challenge, and I've said many times, especially in special ed, you need a menu of options for children because you have children who don't fit in. There's no one program that is the solution for all of the children. So you really have to build that menu. So we've added, for example, over the years, an Alta Ed program at the high school that's been very successful in keeping kids who years ago used to leave and quit school. And now Andrew Vaselli and that program has seen a lot of those kids make it through. And they do a combination of things. They do Apex learning, some online learning, virtual learning, tutoring, whatever it is that's going to work for that child to get that child over the finish line. I think the children who are most at risk for quitting school are the freshmen and sophomores. If they don't have credits, they can't see graduating when they want to graduate. If you can get a kid to close, you can get that child over the line with virtual, with all of these different things. If they have the credit when they may be 18, but they have 19 credits, we will get them across the line. But if they are 17 and have 5 credits, they look at that and say, this isn't going to happen. So that's the challenge that we face. We really need to reach into the middle school with vocational programming and with alternative ed programs, because we're starting to lose kids there now.
Michael, what has turnover been? What's the total staff complement of the schools, and then what's your turnover you've experienced over the last couple of years?
Okay, 2 questions. The total numbers, Martin, off the top of your head, 208.
Of FTEs?
Yeah, FTEs.
Around 315.
Okay, so I'm using teachers, but so 315. When you talk about turnover, we find different reasons for turnover. We'll always have a few retirements each year, and then you'll have a few people that weren't. Nantucket was not what they expected. It's not easy coming here and making it work. And are you surrounded by family, or are you single with no prospect of meeting anybody? There are a host of different reasons. Usually, if we have somebody for 3 years, we keep them. If they can figure out how Nantucket works and figure out housing, so it's, if your question is it housing?
I was really just more curious, how large the staff was, and so
Yeah.
it's 200 and something teachers and 300 when you add in everyone else, and you're adding 8.3 FTEs, so
Right.
that's 4 or 5%
Right.
increase on the teacher staff. And I was just curious how many more people you have to recruit and hire to make up for staff turnover.
That's something that the administrative team has talked about, and the leadership team, our concerns about recruitment. We face the same challenges that the town faces as you try to recruit staff, and we are finding that we have to go to new places to look. I think we need to look in, New York. We may need to look in California, because we want to make sure that our staff reflects our students, and right now it doesn't. We have added some diversity in the last few years, but not anywhere near the percentage that you saw in our enrollment. And that's important to our children. It's important that our children can see themselves in careers as they plan forward. So
typically, how many have you had to hire every year the last couple of years?
If you're counting I would say 25. I'm just going to throw that number out. That's Michael saying a little higher, maybe. Yeah.
Again,
It depends on the year.
Your complement to 210 or 20 or whatever the right now, you're going to have to recruit, interview and recruit and hire 25 to 30 people.
And then mentor those new people as well. And that's becoming a significant piece of what we do. We have to coach them up. So moving forward, this is a community school breakdown. You'll see the appropriation over time. It's kind of interesting if you go back to 2002 to see at one time that appropriation was 402,000, and then it went down to a low my first year here of 235,000. When it jumped from 235 to 350, you should know that 100,000 of that jump was because the community school took responsibility for health benefits, which is not the case with the other school personnel. So they've been sort of chasing that number. They've added some things. They've added tennis over the years. They've added some recreation responsibilities. And I hope that you will look when it comes out this week at the brochure and the offerings of the community school. It's really quite remarkable in what they provide. Of course, the key is to try to keep participant fees down. And you can see that participant fees are double what the appropriation is, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge when your poverty index on the island is going up. And for example, our poverty index is the free and reduced lunch. And that, I think, was around 14% when I arrived. It's now over 30%. Pretty significant. Okay, Martin. Special education residential tuition. I like this slide because it shows you what you have to be careful not to allow. If you look in 2010, you will see that we had an appropriation of 478,000, circuit breaker money coming in, but because our out-of-district tuitions were greater than those two, we had to find 340,000 in the operating budget that wasn't budgeted for that. And that first year, I met with Glenn Field, and I said, Glenn, we can never have that again because we're robbing from Peter to pay Paul. We're taking from funds that were designated for many other different populations and programs. So we increased the appropriation and decreased that budget differential. And since 2013, we've done a better job of using our appropriation plus the circuit breaker to meet our costs. Now, the interesting thing here is that if you look at a special ed placement, and we're talking about residential, you will find them anywhere between $59,000 to over $200,000 per placement. And so you can see why you want to, develop programs here. And in fact, we're talking now about, can we develop a therapeutic day program for kids here? Because that's the next step before you go to a residential program. The other thing that we did 2 years ago that I think FinCom is aware of, we have a special ed stabilization fund, and we took unexpended money at the year's end and put it into what the state now allows as I'll call it a rainy day fund, but it is a fund for unanticipated residential costs. So if a child moves in from New Jersey in a program, a residential program, we assume the costs for that. And so you couldn't possibly anticipate that when you're doing a budget 9 months in advance. So we've started to build this stabilization fund, which has $250,000 in it. And we should continue to put if we can, 50,000 of year-end unexpended, so that when the day happens, and it will, we can cover those expenses without putting everything into the budget for that eventuality. Moving on, budget development. This is what we will accomplish with this budget. I'm not going to read each piece, but we went over different items. And then I don't know if you wanted us to go into the capital project requests or whether you want to leave that to Capcom.
I mean, a quick overview would be great. That's
Okay.
sort of-
Happy to do that. These are not necessarily in the order of greatest need. We are doing a campus-wide master plan. I think that scares people to know that we just built a school and we're talking about building a school. We hope that that is 10 or 20 years down the line, but we would be foolish. We wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we weren't planning on where that school will go. So this originally started with a plan to upgrade the fields, but we quickly realized that we don't want to build fields and then 5 years later say that's where the new school should have gone. So we are factoring in where a new school will go one day and then building fields around that. We have a great planning group that's working on that, and we are phasing all of these moves so that it doesn't hit the town all at once when you have other needs in the town. So if anybody's interested in seeing what that's like, we have actually a meeting. It's either tomorrow or Thursday. So email me if it's an interest of yours. I love it. It's like a puzzle, trying to, and it's sort of fun. We're also every year we put in a request. I'm sorry, Chris.
I'm confused by the 750 when it talks about requesting 750 each year.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So one year, and I didn't bring a pointer, but one year we're going to move the baseball field from where it is, which is a terrible location in back of the high school by the parking lot. We're going to move that into the far right corner. And we have done work where the new playground is, the new intermediate playground. So we're going to move that baseball over there. We would like to build tennis courts. We have a tennis program, and arguably the community could use more tennis courts as well. Then a next phase would be, do we then build an artificial field and artificial surface fields to replace the football field? So staggering it over the years.
So without getting into the specific projects.
Yeah.
The idea is you think you have about $750,000 worth of work each year that you want to do kind of towards your master plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Then 300,000, these are improvements in all schools. It may be cabinets, it may be concrete outside, it could be siding. You know, we do a different section of the school every year. It may be a roof section. And then this is probably the highest priority. This is for a new boiler at the high school. That was original to the building in 1990, and it has been patched together several times, and we're happy and fortunate for the winter that we've had thus far. But that's a must-do, and that will start in July, and then a Bobcat to replace existing grounds equipment.
And one time, 150,000 in technology that we talked about. Is that this?
No, this is different. That technology is for servers. Let me think. No, the 160,000 is for equipment, replacing outdated equipment in the schools. And then this is for the rapid recovery, phone servers, interactive panels. Our interactive whiteboards are starting to age out. So this 150,000 is for a different purpose than the 160.
But is that because it's a bunch of small pieces that don't hit a capital threshold? Is that why it's over in the operating budget?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's it.
More questions?
Average starting salary is 70,000, I figured from looking at this.
No, it's actually higher. But when we use 70,000 for hiring new staff, because we don't bring them in at what the average for the district is. It depends on the position. If you're looking for a special educator, a world language teacher, a math teacher, science teacher, you're probably going to fill that with somebody at the higher end of the salary scale with experience. Whereas some positions, sometimes at the elementary level, you get somebody who's on the younger end of the spectrum. So our range, we have found that 70,000 typically covers it because one position will come in at 65, another one will come in at 85.
And that's including benefits?
No.
Not including benefits?
No, not health, not health.
Great.
Excellent presentation as
Can I-
always.
oh, sorry,
Oh.
I was waiting because I feel like I've been hogging the microphone here, but the same question every year, I think. You're talking about an increase of like $1.5 million. If you had another $1.5 million, what would you do with it? And sort of try to get it at the trade-offs that were made from.
Throwing me that softball and see if I can hit it. I'm glad you asked that question. You often, the FinCom often asks that question. I think, among other things, we need to develop a cadre of coaches, like math coaches and reading coaches, who not only are working with students, but they're improving the practice of staff. So I think that we would add a remedial math teacher at the elementary school. We would add a math coach at the middle school. We would add an ELL coach or two. So those are the things that would immediately come to my mind. Sometimes we have the opportunity through retirements and changes to add something that we didn't expect that we could add. But sometimes you don't, because you're recruiting for the best people that you can get in those positions. So I'm sure if you asked each principal and each department head, they would come up with their own list of things. But those are some things that we've talked about. Beth, would you add anything?
I would say exactly what Mr. Poser just said. I believe that building our coaching capacity will help across the district with curriculum assessment and instruction. I think just to think ahead into the future, I'd love to see some attention paid to dual language programs, a possible dual language program, and perhaps some additional vocational and technical opportunities.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. As always, you're very well prepared, and thank you for everyone
This will be the last
attending.
one. Can we
I
say
know,
thank
this
you
is.
I'll remind you, you said that last year.
Yes.
I guarantee that I will not be making this presentation.
Dr. Hallett, you have some big shoes to fill.
But I do appreciate FinCom's approach to this process, and the fact that you always ask that question every year, because there are always needs. And I'm sure any town department you ask that question could answer that for you too. We do respect that we are one part of the town, and so I know your job is tough. Thank you.
Thank you. You had a comment, sir?
I do.
Could you please come to the microphone?
I'm gonna try.
Thank you.
These seats don't work very well for me. I was introduced as Steve Sordovic. I am on the school committee, but I'm just speaking for myself. I did check with Mr. Kozort ahead of time, and he suggested that I mention this to you, which does not mean that he endorses it. I want to be fair. I will step in on your softball question only for a lot less money. I believe, and will be making a motion tomorrow evening accordingly, that CPS is in significant need of an additional math teacher, just one. By their own reports, math is still significantly lower than our English language results. Those have remained the same. I have mentioned this publicly at school committee. I've discussed it privately, and thus far I haven't gotten anywhere. So I'm going to go with a motion tomorrow evening. Realistically, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Mr. Joe. I'm going to add to your concerns about finding additional staff by asking for this one additional staff member in math for CPS. I don't know how exactly, nor would it be my responsibility or authority to decide whether it's a math teacher in the classroom or an interventionist or a coach. At this point, I just want another person in there. They've tried for the last 3 or 4 years. I taught at CPS for 24 years, for those of you who don't know me. And they've tried, starting back before I retired, for 3 or 4 years to resolve this without an additional staff member. And what they've tried simply hasn't worked. So what I will be asking for, and the $70,000 listed in our budget, I know is more like 85 or so when you add the health insurance to it, but it's still less than a quarter of what we've been told the town has available in other tax levies. They mentioned a figure of $353,000, which may or may not have changed some since the meeting I attended. Pardon?
It's been reduced by 200,000 already.
Okay, so I'm not asking for more than,
15,000 is not even close because we budget a blended average of 35,000 for health insurance. So you're talking about
$100,000.
over $115,000 with about 150 in unused levy capacity.
So it's available. It's not quite as persuasive as I had hoped, and I'll acknowledge that, but it is available. And I cannot tell you what the rest of the school committee will do tomorrow night. I have not been, conversing with them about it. That would not be appropriate, but I think they know it's coming based on what I've said previously. So I would hope, if we can agree on that tomorrow night, that y'all could support that as well in this particular area.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Thank you very much.
No question.
Any questions about it? No? Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.